Greetings and welcome to the Global Healing Network. I'm your host, Dr. Kamal Kokai, and today we are joined by somebody that exemplifies the understanding that a healer is someone that has to do both inner and outer cultivation, right? Because they both go together because there's that big divide within medicine where you go from biomechanical, chemical, then to bioenergetic and consciousness. So, Dr. Robert Woodbine is a naturopathic physician. He's also a practitioner of the Chinese healing arts, Asian healing arts, I should say, here in the United States, in the local community of Harlem in New York. And welcome, Dr. Woodbine.
Thank you so much. Greetings to you. Happy holidays and wishing you the best for the coming year. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah. And you know, there's so many. I like to start with cases with practitioners, but
Yeah.
in your case, I want to start a little bit differently because you've had so many interesting teachers and systems that you work with. And, I'm going to ask you to share a new project that you're involved with. But why don't you share some of your inspiration in your case, which is kind of unusual, particularly in the African American community, is the connection going right back to your father and his
Yeah.
work.
It actually,
And before that, I
actually
felt
goes
that
for
coming.
that. So I've been rather blessed from the time that I was probably about 10 years old. My father took me on as what I would call an apprentice. We lived in Harlem, and he was exposed to Eunice Ingham, who was the major proponent of foot reflexology in the U.S. And he learned foot reflexology from her, and on the weekends he would take me with him to see his clientele, and I would sit right next to him. And back then he didn't have fancy tables. They would sit on their sofa, and he would sit in a chair in front of them, and they would put their feet on top of his lap, and that's how he would do foot reflexology. So I would observe, he would point things out, and then at home I would practice.
Wow.
And so from the time I was 10, maybe 11 years old, that's what we used to do on the weekends together. And as he progressed in his understanding of the variety of modalities in the healing arts, like homeopathy, color therapy, etc., then he exposed me to those things. So I kind of grew up with that. I was an only child, but the oldest of all my cousins that I grew up with. And like most children, I kind of rebelled, and I got tired of hearing my dad teach me all the time. So for a period of time, I just kind of rejected all that stuff till I became a young adult and was going through the stress of being in the corporate world. And I remember going home one day just crying because I was tired of selling the next widget and trying to make my budget.
Right.
And I had the presence of mind to ask myself the question without trying to answer it. What is it that I truly love? And here I am sitting on the sofa just crying, crying, crying. And all of a sudden I had this very clear image of a client of mine. She was in her mid-80s. And I remember doing her feet, and she would just fall asleep. There was nothing wrong with her. She just loved me to, do her feet. But it was that feeling of just satisfaction of exploring and doing her feet, and that feeling, what I understood was that's what I needed to do.
So you were still doing some foot reflexology.
I was always
Right.
doing something.
And I see. Right. You had to basically.
Yeah, I was always doing something.
Right.
I was never that far removed from it.
Okay. And for those of you
Say it again.
I'm saying for people that are hearing that clanging in the back, it's New York City radiator. So just so you know, whatever your imagination might have had, it's just a New York City radiator.
Yeah, so I was never that far removed from him. I was just at a certain point in time, as a young adult teenager, I decided to kind of divorce myself, quote unquote, from my dad's influence in that way. But like the prodigal son, came back to it, and so this was about 1980, probably 87 or so, that I had this epiphany. And obviously, I was still working, 50, 60 hours a week. And I had to figure out, how do I do what it is that I really want to do now? Because now I had the motivation and the energy to do it. So I hadn't finished my undergraduate degree. I was in the office one day and I looked over at a cubicle that was empty and I saw this magazine. I grabbed the magazine because I had some time to kill. And on the cover, there was an interview of the director of admissions for the National College of Naturopathic Medicine. Now, mind you, all this time I never knew that you could pursue this as a formal profession education, because my father was always under the radar. You know, he, you know how that is. He worked for General Motors, as a sweeper, graveyard shift, but his love was the healing arts, and he just kept things under the radar. So that's how I operated. His rule was, you don't do this for a living. You have your job and you do this, on the side, because this is what you love, and you don't charge money for it, so to speak. But I saw that article, and I said, there's no need for me to be schizophrenic about this.
Right.
So I called up the director of admissions that day. We spoke for about 2.5, 3 hours on the phone.
Wow.
Yeah, and I made an appointment to go out to Portland, Oregon. At this time, I was living in Massachusetts. And I spent a weekend to about 4 days there and made up my mind that that's what I wanted to do. But mind you, I said I didn't have my undergraduate degree. You needed that to matriculate. So not only did I work 50, 60 hours a week, I went back to night school, put a 2-year plan in place, got my bachelor's out the way. I also needed a source of income because I was going to become a full-time student, medical student.
Right.
So I also pursued massage therapy 3 nights a week while I was working, while I was going to school. And 2 years later, I gave them a 6 months notice, and I left the corporate world and started naturopathic medicine at the National College of Naturopathic Medicine in 1992.
And more importantly, you haven't looked back, except to tell the story.
It was interesting, because, well, the reason I didn't finish my undergraduate degree is because I became a father when I was 22. So I left, college, and ironically, I went to General Motors. I wasn't a sweeper, but I was on the assembly line for a year until I got laid off. It was during the oil embargo of 1974. And so, being a young father and trying to take care of my responsibilities, it was difficult to finish my undergraduate degree. I always tried. I was always going to different schools trying to get credits. But when I had that epiphany in 87, that's when I got the fuel to actually just go for it. And like you said, I didn't stop. I never looked back. Once I got my naturopathic doctorate, I also got my master's in Chinese medicine from the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine. In 1985, I started studying with my first Qigong and Tai Chi Chuan instructor, Master Mantak Chia. So that's been 30 years of pursuing that and studying with different teachers all over the world, in France, Thailand, in China, etc. So I've accumulated a repertoire of different modalities, and I had to stop at a certain point because there was that process of I was so intrigued by different things, and it got to be too much because I wasn't practicing. It became a distraction. So at a certain point in time, instead of going broad, I started going deep and just paying attention to certain things. And I've had a clinical practice in Harlem since 2000, and seen, I don't know, so many hundreds of patients, and for the most part been helpful. I wouldn't say that I've cured anybody. For me, that's a level of arrogance because I'm just a conduit for what the universe, provides for the patient to heal themselves, basically. Yeah.
I mean, you've said so much in this brief 10 minutes. You've said so much about yourself and your philosophy and your perseverance. So I want to pick your brain a bit, or kind of go into your spirit understanding of what you do, because in point of fact, medicine, at least the cutting edge of medicine, has really gone off into a realm now where, at least in the West, they're beginning to look at consciousness, beginning to look at bioenergetics in the body. And ultimately, that's what Chinese medicine, or the Asian healing arts is about, is understanding the flow of energy. And I want you to talk about some of the things that stand out that are such a counterpoint to all the emphasis on nutrition and biochemistry. And of course, those things are important, but they have to complement a whole bioenergetic piece, which is so subject to our emotional states, our state of mind, our state of health. And maybe if you can share some of the things that you've learned, and we can have a little conversation about this.
Yeah, the bioenergetics is not mutually exclusive from the biomechanical. It's a matter of balance, and I think with Western medicine, and it's a young medicine. It's only 150, 200 years old. It's been overemphasized into the mechanical, but the pendulum swings. It reaches a certain trajectory and automatically goes the other way. So all things are coming back to what's really relevant and important. My equation that I share with my students and my patients is E equals MC squared. And if we remember, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. And the equal sign means that it's a balanced equation in both directions. But the way we read from left to right, and we end up with MC squared, the matter of things, and forget about the energy.
Right.
But each sign is veiled between the matter and between energy that ties itself to me. And the practice that I've been sharing with my patients and my students has everything to do with recognizing that and accepting that we are spiritual beings, energetic beings, vibrational beings in a temporal physical mass. So my best friend always says, no one gets out alive.
Say that again?
My best friend says, no one gets out alive. We all go the way of understanding that this physical body is a temporary thing. And depending on your belief system, perhaps you can agree that we exist thereafter. My journey has been to try to understand how to harness the hereafter now and try to enhance the physical body as much as possible and the physical experience as much as possible. So Chinese medicine in of itself, the roots of Chinese medicine, which is the energetic practices, Qigong, those are the things that I truly love and I try to share with my patients and my students because they provide the foundation for being self-reliant and self-sufficient. In the absence of all of the biomechanical things, what does one do? How do you take care of yourself? How do you heal yourself? How do you make yourself well? One of the simplest things that I share, and it's always a revelation to my students and my patients, is that yes, we're breathing, but are we breathing optimally? And most of us just sort of glide along with our breath. And if you spend any time just exploring the beauty of being able to breathe as deeply as possible and exhale as deeply as possible, it opens up gateways of personal understanding and revelation, and physical wellness as well. So something as simple as breathing optimally can make a radical change in your status of well-being.
And let me just add a point to further, even not that it needs validation, but what
Mm-hmm.
part of what we're trying to do by using bioenergetic imaging in my
Yes.
office
Yes.
is to really, quote unquote, objectify
Yes.
outside of any one person's individual perception or ability, the actual energetic field that surrounds a person.
Yes.
And clearly, what we've noticed as we're filming somebody and looking at their chakras in terms of the wavelengths of light that are being reflected, that
Mm-hmm.
it will change when they breathe deep. You can
Yes.
see it actually clear.
Yes.
You can see the right kind of vibrational energy. Just it just opens up.
Yes.
And as soon as they contract, and some people tend to be shallow breathers,
Yes.
you can see that the coloration is just darker colors, and you see a lot of energetic shielding.
Yes.
But once they start breathing, it totally opens up. So
It shows. Yeah.
yeah.
And to your credit, that's a wonderful objective feedback system that you can use to
Yeah,
change and to train your patients to be more self-aware.
exactly.
The culture that we live in bombards us with enough distractions that we don't pay attention to those things. So for those people that are so immersed in the distractions, it's always a revelation that something as vital as the breath can make such a radical change. And here you have a tool that can actually show them that.
Right.
What I try to do is to find ways to convince my students and my patients to take the leap of faith. And as we know, faith is in things unseen. So you just have to do it. Nike is right, just do it. And when you do it, and if you do it long enough, you start to get the internal feedback, and then that feeds on itself, and you continue from there. So those are the things that I treasure the Qigong for and the Chinese medicine for. It's not the acupuncture per se. It's not the Chinese herbs per se, because those things can be taken away from you. It's your devotion to your own self-awareness and making the commitment to cultivate your personal resilience by spending the time immersed in cultivating who you are to the optimal possibilities of doing that.
I know in the past, and I've talked with you, and I remember when I was on radio interviewing you, I always asked you to share that example of Mantak Chia, because that's such a demonstration of Chi and that energetic presence. Because I know he was one of your original teachers, right?
Yes.
And,
actually, I've had. I'll share with you something that precedes Mantak Chia.
Okay.
So where did my interest come into wanting to even explore Tai Chi Chuan and Qigong? There are actually two examples. One is I remember when I was a kid, I must have been about maybe 9 or 10 years old, living in Harlem. And I love Roy Rogers, and the Lone Ranger. And so they happened to be on TV, and my parents wanted to go out. They wanted to take them with me. And I said no. I really wanted to see the show. So they acquiesced, and I'm watching the show, and I'm home alone. All of a sudden, I felt the presence of someone in the room. And, I was a little frightened, but I was still distracted by the show. The show ended, and so I didn't have a choice but to become aware of what was there. I turned around, and we lived in a little railroad apartment, just 3 rooms. And so when I turned around, I'm looking in the kitchen, and there's this person standing there. And he's completely, not white in terms of being Caucasian, but white in terms of luminescence. And I could see his features, and I'm just looking, and he didn't try to frighten me, but I was scared. And so I'm crying, and I'm just crying and crying. Next thing I know, my father and my mother are, shaking me, and what's the matter? What's the matter? I said, there's a man in the corner of the house. There's nobody there. And so they asked me to describe this person, and I described them, and they said, "Oh, that's your grandfather."
Mm.
So somehow he was there watching me, but I didn't understand that stuff. But that was my first introduction to energy other than the physical. Years later, when I was living in Boston, Massachusetts, I was wandering through Chinatown, and I happened to see this flyer about this thing called Tai Chi. And it was in a loft, so I went up to the loft, and they had bleachers, so I'm sitting on the bleacher, and there's an advanced student giving a little lecture about chi and energy and that kind of stuff. Well, all foreign stuff to me. But in the corner of the loft, in the dark area of the loft, there was an elderly person, shocking white hair, dressed in black, facing the wall, facing an altar. So there were candles there. And next thing I heard was the student said, if you want to experience the power of whatever it was, come on down. So it's like The Price is Right, come on down. So I was the first one. I ran down there, and out my peripheral vision, I see this elderly man, sort of get up, and he must have been like 2 feet tall. He was really, really short. He was maybe like 5 something. And he was elderly. He must have been at least 80 years old. And he's shuffling, over to where we were. And he stands in front of me. So he's so short, I'm looking down at him. Mm. And the student is standing next, to the side of us. And he says, so what I want you to do is I want you to punch him as hard as you can. Don't hold anything back. So being young and arrogant, I'm saying, I'm going to hurt this guy. And so he kind of understood what I was thinking. He said, look, you're not going to hurt him. Just punch him as hard as you can. So I hauled off with this haymaker, and I got about 18 inches away from his body, and the most amazing thing happened. There was sort of this warm field of softness that my fist sort of went into and bounced out, and he never moved. Mm-hmm. And his eyes just kind of twinkled, and he smiled. And I completely disconnected and turned around, and I just left.
That's an unusual response.
I just left, and I wandered around Chinatown for about 2-3 hours because I couldn't compute that. I didn't understand what happened because he didn't move, and I felt this thing that wasn't there that I couldn't see, and it pushed me away. So that was really my introduction to things unseen that I wanted to discover and understand for myself. So then, Mantak Chia comes into the picture, and more recently, there's a grandmaster in Brooklyn by the name of Roosevelt Gainey. Mm-hmm. And Roosevelt, he's magical, but it's not magic. It's a technology that someone has to teach you the template, and then you have to do the work. And Roosevelt has the capacity to move people without touching them. And I've seen him do it, I've felt it. And so my trajectory has been to uncover that technology and then share that with people so that they can be self-reliant and self-sufficient.
I want to interject something here because what I'm trying to do parallels that, because what I'm really interested in is human beings as portals to other dimensions.
That's what we are.
Exactly. But portals in the sense like how you connected with your grandfather.
Yes.
Or there's so many people that suffer because
they're disconnected.
They're disconnected, or they're connected in such a way that the energy that comes through totally derails them. Yes. Meaning they're too sensitive. They pick up other people's feelings and thoughts.
Yeah.
And they can't handle that. They become depressed. They're overly anxious. But I am really fascinated because when you start talking about that other dimensional piece
Yes,
with this, with that kind of spirit, now you're moving into more African traditions.
absolutely. Well, you're
Right.
moving to all indigenous cultures.
Right. Right.
All indigenous cultures, because every single culture on the planet has had access to that which is unseen.
And what's amazing is that it's in Western culture, Western mainstream culture, that there's such a disconnect, which
Yeah,
in part creates all the chaos
yeah,
because it's not being informed,
yeah.
so it can move forward in a harmonious fashion.
I think on a higher level that's
The
the
plan.
purpose.
It's the plan, right?
That's the plan. You and I have both treated cancer patients,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not uncommon for a cancer patient to look at their cancer and say, what a blessing
Right.
that I had the cancer, because now I can begin to focus on what's true and what my focus and purpose in life is, as
Right.
opposed to the evilness of, quote unquote, the evilness of cancer. That small population that's out of sync with the rest of the world has created this cancerous metastasis historically,
Right.
and we rail against it, and rightfully so, because it is deadly. But on a higher level, as much as the victim, quote unquote, victim needs to be healed, so does the perpetrator. And I think that at the highest level, that's the dance that we're in, is to find ways to heal ourselves so everybody moves
So
in
that
the.
everybody has that light coming in, and not just a few folks. The
Yeah,
whole vibration has and awareness has to be elevated. Because if
absolutely.
not, it's just an endless cycle
Yeah,
of this, kind of quote unquote suffering
yeah,
that people have to go through. So
yeah. And suffering is just a vibration
right,
of information. And so,
right,
what do you do with the information?
right,
Much like pain.
right,
And sometimes you can fold and contract to it, or sometimes you learn to expand and overcome it.
right.
And you one with it, and then move forward from there.
So let me ask you, because the word is that you're semi-retired right now, right? So I mean, healers just don't retire; they
No,
just go to work on other planes or
so
other
just
work. So can you share a little bit about your upcoming transition? Let's say.
let's say transmutation. I'm not quite ready to transition.
I hear you.
So my deepest love is the qigong and the tai chi chuan, for the reasons I've stated before. Not just my personal enjoyment of it, but what I can teach and offer someone else that hopefully will put them on their correct path. So my most current teacher is Dr. Yang Ming, and he's a prolific writer. He's been studying, practicing, and teaching Tai Chi Chuan, the martial arts Qigong, for the last 45 years, originally from Taiwan. 9 years ago, he bought 243 acres in the northern mountains of California in Humboldt County as part of his 10-year legacy project to preserve the traditions of all the Chinese martial arts and culture. And he recruited many young students between the ages of 18 and their mid-20s to be in that 10-year legacy project, because it's traditional, it's extremely rigorous. They train 6-8 hours a day, 6 days a week. So he wanted people that could tolerate that kind of intensity. He didn't want anybody old. Most recently, in January of this year, he decided that he would do a 3-year program to be coterminous with the 10-year program. And that program is not age restricted. It's for anyone that can qualify. And he only wanted 5 students for that program. So I've been studying with him since 2001. And as soon as he thought about doing this, I raised my hand right away and said, I want to be part of this.
Mm-hmm.
So he made the application process. He opened that up in July. I think I was probably the first one to send in my application. And then the second part of the application process was to actually come there and spend 2 to 4 weeks being tested, which was pretty rigorous. So I went in October and I passed that and got confirmation that I was accepted into the 3-year program. And so that starts next September, and I'll be there for 3 years, 9 months out of each year.
Off the grid.
Off the grid. Yeah, he's literally off the grid.
Right.
Solar panels. He raises his own food. He's got his own hens, chicken coops, the whole thing. He's got his own water resource. And yeah, we'll be training 6 days a week, 6 to 8 hours every day. And we start our training every day with meditation for an hour.
As a kid coming up,
Yes.
and I remember going to watch the kung fu movies. Really
Yeah,
came
yeah,
into vogue when I was a kid. So,
yeah,
and Shaolin this,
yeah,
Shaolin that,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
mean, this takes me so much back to the eye. Literally, it's like you're going off to be a monk in a monastery,
Yeah,
basically. You
it's a
know,
monastic existence.
yeah, yeah,
Um, there are 2 females that are in the program.
right,
But Dr. Yang, as generous as he is with his teaching, he's also very, very, very traditional and very strict. So there's no playing around. I mean, we can be playful, but there's no playing around in that sense. So it's very monastic in that sense, which brings me to the things that I've learned from Mata Chia in terms of being able to cultivate, harness, and manage your sexual energy, because that's the fuel for your spiritual growth.
So basically, you're saying some of them young guys that were in that program probably had to leave.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Dr. Young, that's why he has that second part of the admission process.
Mm,
Is you need to come and you need to find out if you can do this, and he needs to know if you can do it too.
right.
And at the beginning, he was very carefully selected younger guys, but a lot of them dropped out
Right.
because they couldn't manage their sexual energy and they were distracted by their girlfriends and that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So he doesn't. He's very choosy. He's very picky about who can train with him. So I'm one of those 5.
All right.
And yes, I've had 30 plus years of doing qigong, studying qigong, but this goes even deeper. And my intent is to explore and devote my efforts to really understanding and making manifest the things that were triggered in me when I stood in front of that little old man that I couldn't hit.
Right.
And when I saw my grandfather, and the times that I spent with Roosevelt where he moves people and he doesn't touch them, I know that that's true, but I want to know that I know that I know that I know.
Well,
And then I want to pass that on to other folks and let them explore that for themselves, because the way the world is moving now, I think we're going to come to a place and a time where not only will you have to depend on each other, so be more communal, but you really have to be able to tap into your resources internally and how that portal ties you into your ancestors and allow that energy to come through.
well, that's a blessing. So I know that we're going to continue to compare notes,
Yes, sir.
um, because I certainly appreciate your journey, and
Thank
that you found something that's really compatible with who you are and your course of development and stuff. And I wish that for everybody.
you.
And the blessing is being able to find that, and while you're still in your body and stuff,
Yeah,
and have that
and to have the
opportunity.
courage to pursue it,
That's right.
because it
That's right.
really does take courage. in light of all the distractions that we have. Remember the Matrix, where you have to choose the pill. And remember, 3/4 into the movie, the guy says, "Yeah, I know it's fake, but I want to do that anyway." So he takes the pill again, and he goes into the Matrix.
That's right.
It takes courage to stay out of it,
Right.
and to live life in a real way. Yeah.
Well, you have all of our support, and you have a whole community behind you of people that you've helped, and you've been a part of that community up in Harlem, and New York. So we appreciate you.
And my intent is to bring it all back.
All right. Is there any way, this might inspire some folks that might want to have a conversation with you, or
Sure.
How can they contact you?
They can call me at 866-327-2254, or they can email me at urbanqi, that's URBANQI @gmail.com.
All the best. We've been talking to Dr. Robert Woodbine. I should have been the better host and said your name earlier, but I got engrossed in the story, so forgive me. But thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Woodbine.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Right.
It's mutual, and continued success and wellness to you and your family.
All right, my brother. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye now. Peace.